Thank you for tuning in to Leadership Level Up. I'm Brian Prairie.
And I'm Dr. Jeff Williamson.
I am just starting my leadership journey.
And I've been guiding leaders for 30 years.
Our podcast aims to shine a spotlight on outstanding leaders and provide a platform for them to describe their leadership journey and share the guiding principles that have helped them become great leaders. Today we are joined by the Executive Director of Harbor House, Jenny Schoenwetter, to discuss her leadership journey.
Well, welcome to Leadership Level Up Podcast. I'm Jeff Williamson. My co-host Brian Prairie is with us today. We're really excited to have our friend Jenny Schoenwetter with us as well. She's the Executive Director of Harbor House here in Kankakee County. And through the course of the conversation, you'll hear more about what they do and who they serve and what that's all about. But we want to give Jenny a chance to say hello and tell us a little bit about Harbor House.
Thank you so much for having me on. Mm-hmm. Excited to be here. My name is Jenny Schoenwetter, as you said, Executive Director of Harbor House. I've been with the organization for about 4 years. Mm-hmm. Harbor House has been in the community serving Kankakee and Iroquois County since the 1970s. Mm-hmm. Started grassroots to meet the community's needs. There was nobody else doing that work, and the movement nationally was starting to bring more attention to violence against women in that 70s and 80s time frame. So we were right along in that time. We exist to empower individuals, families, and communities through domestic violence programs, advocacy, and prevention. Mm-hmm. So we're continuing to grow as the community needs us, and then also transitioning as our community has different needs arising. So making sure that we're not so set onto just doing one thing, mm-hmm. But being adaptive as the culture and as COVID, as we need to be adaptive.
Yeah, sure. So how long have you been with Harbor House?
I joined in August 2018, okay. So I'm just under 4 years, which time is sure flying by very quickly. It does not feel like that.
Yeah. And so you were a new director when you came into that role, I believe, at least in that space, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So my background is actually nonprofit fundraising administration between my degrees and then my work experience. I had exposure to different social service organizations like Harbor House through, I served on United Way's board of directors for quite a few years, launched Women United as a part of that. But then when this position came open, it was actually the only job in the United States that I applied for. I was planning to move abroad at that time. And out of all of the jobs with the UN and other agencies that I applied for, I didn't have the appropriate experience at that time.
I see.
So this was the only place that I had gotten an interview with, and it aligned very strongly. I know. Yeah. It aligned very strongly with my personal mission, and I wanted to make sure that I could invest in my community. I had a lot of people reaching out saying, I think that you would be a really good fit for this. Mm-hmm. So I went through the interview process, was offered that, and has just been a 4-year time frame of growing, of learning a lot, because I also don't have a social work background. Again, it's all business, and I work with 90% social workers. So that's been a huge learning curve for me.
Sure. Okay, so your college years, you were going into nonprofit and like the administrative part of that. Mm-hmm. So can we maybe step back a little further and kind of what led you to that? Because it at least to me, because we don't really know each other that well, I want to know like kind of what led you to that. Every time I've talked to you, you're very giving and very compassionate person, and going into non-for-profit administration again, that you have to have that. You had to carry that with you. Mm-hmm. So, what'd you do as a kid? Where
did that come from?
Yeah, where did that come from?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your kind words. My parents were very invested and dedicated to our community. So my family was a foster family growing up. So I was exposed to children who had a lot of different life experiences, which at that time, I didn't understand that fully. I didn't understand the concept of trauma, of how trauma impacts children, but I saw how my parents would willingly open up their house to anybody who needed that care, that love, and that support. And so that generosity, I think, helped to set the tone of my life. They were very involved, and still are to this day, with like volunteers on the ambulance and in the church and doing all of the things. And so I think that was instilled as a value in me, because even other family members, not just my parents, that was a big priority for them. So I think that with seeing that not everybody has the same life experience, and I was very fortunate in a lot of ways to come from the background that I came from. And then plus I had a lot of opportunities of traveling later on, more so in college, not as much in my childhood, but that helped me to be exposed to across the world. People don't have the life experience that I do. So I am very privileged. I am very lucky to have had the educational opportunities, the financial opportunities. You know, I wasn't hungry. I had the opportunity to go to a private school, whereas I know that that's not true for a lot. So that helped to bring me to that nonprofit sector. I was considering for a period of time going more for like corporate finance. That was actually originally my major when I had started off in college. Was doing corporate side of things, but then the more I traveled, the more I thought on it and reflected of what do I want out of life. I knew that no matter where I went, I could have an impact. There is nothing wrong with corporate finance.
Right.
That is an amazing field as well. That's an important field. And that you can, you know, have a higher earning capacity, that you can impact people financially in a different way. And in your workplace, you can still impact people. But I felt like for me, I wanted to do something more in the nonprofit administration because I felt that I had a lot of gifts and strengths that I could bring to that arena and help to almost bring like a business and a professionalism side of that, because like long term, something that I would love to do and I always wanted to do when I was even in high school, I was dreaming of this. It was like, what if I could be a consultant with nonprofits, develop all of this amazing nonprofit experience, get to a very comfortable earning capacity to where that's something I could just come alongside and partner locally, internationally with places that are doing amazing work, have amazing missions, but don't have the business sense side of things.
Exactly.
Because that's where I, like for Harbor House, I'm the first executive director to come in not from social work, but from business. And I think you can reflect on my 4 years there and see, okay, that kind of makes sense because I see the world differently from more of that data, that business side compared to the social work, which there's nothing wrong with either side.
Sure. Oh no, yeah, but in the work that we do within Pathfinder is we do a lot of work with not-for-profits as well, and that always, and I've been on boards of not-for-profits, and it always seems like there's a lot of people that are passionate and want to do the help, but they don't know how to make this sustainable, like this thing, you know, and that part is so important. And it seems more maybe like the boring part of it, but it's like it is the most important part of it to keep this organization going.
Luckily, that's not the boring part to me.
Because you love the finance.
Yes, and like I've answered the hotlines, I've sat in on the counseling sessions, and man, it makes me so grateful for my staff because I'm like, I could not do that day in and day out. Give me a spreadsheet, and I am set for the day.
Okay.
I love though in that space that their work as social workers and direct service providers just fuels you. You know, you see the impact they're having with clients, with families, and that fuel, because I know you love to tell stories about the Harbor House, and their work as social workers fuels you to raise dollars, to tell the story, to engage the community. And I know that's something you've really enjoyed in this role.
I always tell the team that they are doing the hard work. They are the ones on the front lines helping to essentially do homicide prevention in our community, listen to the hard stories, and then I get to be there to support them, to empower them, to make sure they have the resources, whatever that looks like, in order to meet the needs of that person, and then tell the community of this is what we're doing. Because a lot of people, I found when I first started, I did kind of like a listening tour throughout the community. So I met with every board member, every staff member, and then I had a list of about 30 community leaders. I asked them all the same questions, and then I collated that data of what am I stepping into? Because I didn't know a ton about Harbor House. I could tell you they did something with domestic violence and they have a secret location. And that's about all I could say. And I knew their executive director. That was it. But then through that, it was a lot of nobody knew what exactly we did, or they're like, well, you don't want people to know about you. And it's like, no, everybody needs to know about us. They don't need to know where we're located. So that's what I identified super early on, is we need to be talking more about the amazing work of the team, because the team does things that I could never do. That is not where my strengths lie, and I know my lane, and that is not my lane. So I love just getting to listen to them, because I've learned a ton from them. I've grown a ton from them, because that's never quite where I've lived in that. I've never quite lived in that world. But I love telling their story, and that does bring me so much energy. And even on the tough days, the hard days where you're just feeling so discouraged and the world is against you, there's my program director. She leads a support group on Thursday nights, and she'll usually call me after that support group. And she's just like on cloud 9 of just the energy from that group.
Right.
And then just getting to hear that energy. It's like, this is why we're doing it.
That's your rocket fuel.
Yeah.
See, they share that with you. I love that so much.
And seeing the eyes light up in the community of when you tell the story of, you know, everybody's going to ask, well, why don't they just leave? Let's talk about the barriers.
Yeah.
Like, let me do that and see how in your eyes you're like, oh, it isn't that easy. This is highly complicated. So I love that community education side of things because it's on all of us to make change in the community.
Right.
Yeah.
Why did you? I love that you went out into the community and asked like, what do we need, or what do you need to know? And so what was it? Just the fact that you didn't know what you needed to know, and then just like went to those people? Like, because I mean, to me that's like right away like, oh, that's a leader. Like leaders do that. Like they want to know more about the thing that they're going to be doing. So what drove you to that?
When I had accepted this position, it was July of 2018, and then I started August 2018. I had a month off between my two jobs because I'm like, I kind of want to do some traveling, and plus I had no clue what I was stepping into. So I knew that I read a ton of leadership, not just leadership, but like domestic violence books and nonprofit administration. And then I'd made a list of some executive directors of DV agencies in other communities. The CEO of the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I was down in Springfield for meetings with my past job. And I was like, hey, while I'm here, I know I currently don't work in the DV field, but can I meet with you? So I had developed these questions early on of things that I knew I didn't know, but I needed to figure out very quickly. Because I knew that my first 90 days was going to be a critical time period. And I was essentially trying to get that 90-day plan from everybody else because I don't want to be the leader that steps in and makes change for the sake of change.
Yes.
I want to make sure that I'm making if something doesn't need to change, I'm not going to change it. I want to make sure that I'm making a difference and investing appropriately my own energies and the staff's energies. So the staff had a great perspective of the history of the organization, and they knew most in depth internally what needed to change, what needed to grow and develop. The board of directors, from a governance oversight perspective, could speak a lot more on the fiscal side of things, on the community side of things. So I wanted their perspective. And then the community leaders, your organization is only as strong as your community is. So I knew I needed their insights as well. So then out of all of that, I was able to identify like the top 5 things of, here's the low-hanging fruit that I can do. Nobody knows what we do. Great, I can do public speaking. That's one thing I can do well. I can't do anything else. I can't answer a hotline, but I can tell a story and I can listen. So I got a ton of speaking engagements lined up, and I would go and sit in the program director's office and I'd say, I need you to tell me everything you know about this topic and just start talking. And she would talk and just pour out information, and I would write notes. And then I would put that into a speech. I would structure that and everything and be able to regurgitate that good work. So I'm like, okay. You know, one of the biggest needs is the community outreach side and the funds side. So it was, you know, a term that I've used, I don't know if it's good or bad, but in regards to kind of this structure of that first 90 days, as well as like my approach to the finances and the grant side, is I call it optimistic ignorance. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I could have a good outlook on things, and I could do the best I could do. And if the door closed, the door closed. You're going to find another door. So that's a lot of how I've approached it, is just optimistic ignorance. I'm just going to do what I can do, and we'll go from there.
I love that mentality.
You make a good point too, is that as leaders, this is my opinion, as leaders, we have to be learning, right? If we ever reach a point where we think, okay, I'm the leader and I got this all figured out, we're in deep trouble. Right? And so I love that you hit the ground learning, because leaders, I think, have to be learning. The only way we stay fresh and relevant in the leadership space is to listen to people, to pay attention, to ask questions, to talk to people who are on the front lines, as you said. So I love that aspect of always learning as a leader. I think that's such an important reality.
I just had somebody ask me earlier this week, because they knew I was coming up on 4 years, and they're like, do you feel like you know what you're doing now? And I'm like, maybe about 25%. Yes. Like more than I did 4 years ago. Yes, definitely. But I'm like, there's so much growth that's coming so quickly. I've never gone through a lot of this before. And even COVID, I had never led a domestic violence agency with a mass shelter through a pandemic before.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just been learning, and the humility of saying too, hey, I don't know how to do this.
Yeah.
And being able to go to those people and lean into your team. I don't always have the best idea, but I can give an idea. Like the team knows, if you ask an opinion from Jenny, I will give you an opinion. Doesn't mean it's the right opinion, but let's build off of that. Let's see where that leads us. So I think that through learning, through listening, through asking really good questions, that's been a big part of what's gotten me to where I am, because I don't go into spaces thinking that I'm the expert in it, because I know that I'm not. Even yesterday, I'm the secretary of the Illinois Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. It's a statewide entity that I actually got to testify to the legislator to get that made into a law. So I'm sitting in there with all of these judges, physicians, police chiefs, ED, executive directors that have 20 plus years of experience. And then there's me as secretary that I'm like, thank God I have to be secretary, because number one, you got to pay attention. And number two, you got to make sure that you're putting names associated with the right people, so I can learn people quickly and I can see what kinds of questions are they asking. And so I, like for that kind of thing, I still walk into a room and I assume that there's just a lot that I can learn from there. And I can maybe offer some perspectives and opinions, but I'm not going to say that that's gold.
That's so refreshing, because I know when I first started taking on more responsibilities, going into those situations, I was just like, oh my gosh, everybody knows more than me and they know I'm a fraud, or, but I love your mentality. It's like, I have something to learn from every one of these people. Instead of being afraid of it, you're like, okay, I want to talk to you and you and you, because there's knowledge, bits of knowledge I love that.
And I think finding those spaces to do that too. So for the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Harbor House is a member of that, so they do a lot of statewide advocacy for DV. I serve on their funding oversight committee. So they have like 6 different committees, and I looked at that and I read through it and I was like, I don't know much about the majority of this, but I know I can learn a lot here. So I applied to be on the committee, and I had a lot of business experience that they felt would strengthen that. So I joined that, and the first couple of meetings, I just sat there and listened. And so it's been something that I was so scared to step into that. When they asked me to serve on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review, I was like, what am I bringing to this? Like, there's people with way more opinions and insights and knowledge base that they can bring so much more. So I think it's stepping out in confidence and boldness of putting yourself in those spaces, because that has been what's propelled me forward, because I applied to serve on that committee, because I asked questions of people who were so much smarter than me. A lot of doors have been opened to me that I never would have dreamed.
Right. Yeah. And I feel that they respect, like, then you gain their respect because you're like, oh, you're being humble, or and then they kind of like, and then they're kind of just the floodgates open. They want to share everything with you. So I love that. I love that so much.
Made me think a few months ago I was leading a book series with an organization, and we were using one of the Brene Brown books. And in that particular book, their research indicated that the best thing to build trust among a team, an organization, was for the leader to be asking questions. And you that's exactly what I'm hearing you talk about, was when we ask questions, that signals, I don't think I have all the answers, and I'm asking you because I think you probably know things that I don't know. And so I thought that was fascinating. Of all the things we would think of as trust building, which trust is huge, asking questions, asking for help was the number one thing that they found from that research that
I believe that
built trust. And if we're asking questions, we're open to others' input. I love that.
I think sometimes leaders in an unhealthy space will ask questions out of appearances, but really trying to nudge people to their answer of like, I just want to make it look like you're a part of the process. But that will come back to hurt you far more, because people can tell. People can tell if you're being fake and if you're using them and everything like that. But when I reflect on, for me, again, going back to, I didn't know anything about domestic violence outside of personal life experience, and my mom is a very strong influence in my life of standing against violence against women. Some crazy stories I can tell about helping DV
Maybe we should
survivors
have
from my
Mom on.
childhood. Oh,
We should
that would be
Mom.
a trip. Yeah.
Or both of you. That might be.
There we go.
even
Oh
better.
goodness,
I love
See,
that.
that would be very interesting. But I didn't have any of that formal domestic violence education. I didn't have any social work training or anything like that. So I had to ask questions. And so the team, I think, learned that I was genuinely curious. And even today, I have a lot more program knowledge. I'm an expert now on the paperwork side of things, but there's still a threshold that I don't know anything past this point. And even if I do know a little bit, I know that you guys are working in it day in and day out. So you guys have the opinions that are going to help guide this. And the community, they know our community side of things. I have my perception, my opinions, but you know this niche, you know this population, you know this need. So I think just approaching it in that way and asking questions, that's 100% very true. It has been an effective way for me to grow and lead.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about growing up in a home that hosted foster kids and your parents having that space that was this welcoming, compassionate kind of place that helped to, I would say, helped to shape the heart that you have for the work you do today. So that's so foundational in that way. But I also want to hear more about, like, when you think about the heart of leadership, which that's so important to me, is that our heart is really wanting to serve our team, is really wanting to serve the people that, quote, answer to us or that report to us. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how, it's such a sensitive, important area that you work in to integrate the heart of leadership into that. What's that look like for you?
For me, I think my perspective on leadership is it's people. It's investing in people, it's empowering people to do the best work that they can. So with my team, every other year, with the leadership team, we'll read a book together and discuss it. And then in the opposite year, the staff will read an entire book together and we'll kind of work through it and everything. So there's that continual growing. But there's a book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman that our leadership team walked through just last year. But that is, I think, a big stance for me on leadership is it's multiplying other people. It's not trying to create carbon copy versions of myself, because we would be a horrible organization if they were all Jennies. Like, people would not be coming to us for help.
I've
for
said
sure.
that about
So,
me.
yeah.
I've said the same
We
thing.
don't need a room full of Jeffs.
No.
One is probably more than enough.
Yeah, the world doesn't need two. That would not be a good thing. But with that, it's helping to identify people's strengths, empower them in those strengths, and then finding the right seat on the bus. So that's, I think, a lot of what we've been going through as an organization through all of this growth is assessing, are we all sitting on the right seats? Is there a seat that would be better for us? Because if so, maybe we need to develop a position that can meet a need that we hadn't really thought of because it's outside of the normal structure, but it exists, and this person can fill that. But I love being able to help my team realize their own strength and their own power, because I think that oftentimes in social services, individuals are so quick to focus on other people, are so quick to be helping other people that they will sacrifice themselves to the point of burnout. And plus, even in domestic violence, vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress is very real. The team can get burnt out so quickly. So getting to offer that care and that support and that reminder of, they are amazing. There's nobody on my team that I wouldn't bend over backwards for, because they're all just such amazing people. And that's also a part of the hiring process, making sure that you hire well. But even on a personal level, so the team knows for me that personal finance is a big passion for me. So when I came in shortly after, I noticed that nobody was taking care of themselves. And I shouldn't say nobody, that's way too extreme. But for many, they were so focused on everybody else that the idea of retiring, they're like, no, I'm just gonna die here, or I'll retire when I'm 90, or like, just bury me out in the backyard. It's like, well, I want you to be able to retire when you want, to be empowered to pursue whatever those goals are, because you might have kids and grandkids that, even though right now at 40 you think you're going to be here forever, I don't want you to have to be here forever. So bringing in even a lot of that personal financial empowerment concepts so that they can feel more comfortable in their own lives, and then that will carry out to survivors of bringing that knowledge. But how you treat your team, how you treat the people you're leading is going to directly impact how you're going to be impacting your customers or your clients. If you don't treat your staff and your team well, they aren't going to treat everybody else well, which means your community is going to stop coming to you.
Right.
So leadership is just people and caring for people.
Yeah. One of the things I thought of too is you're talking about your team taking care of themselves, because they can be so invested on serving that they maybe don't always take the best care of themselves, their health, their wellness, and those kind of things. So what would be some ways that for you as a leader that you are intentional about taking care of yourself as a leader and growing as a leader? What would be some ways that you found to do that?
A couple of different ways. So I'm very protective of my team's 40-hour work week. So that's something that throughout the interview process for a full-time employee, obviously if it's part-time, whatever it is that their hours are and everything. But I've noticed that a lot of our team, especially when it comes to community events, they're like, oh, I'll volunteer to do that. I'll volunteer to do X, Y, Z. I'll come and pull weeds. I love that you have the heart for that, and I so appreciate your commitment and dedication to this, but I need you to be healthy, and I need you to be able to disconnect from this, because the more that you're connecting with this trauma in different ways, that means that you're not connecting with your family, with your support system, with yourself. So being protective of their time. So even like for some staff, if I notice that they're responding to a lot of emails after hours, then I'll just be like, okay, we need to talk about that, because I'm good at that with my team. I'm horrible at that as a person.
It's just going to
but
You're taking care of
I've gotten
them.
better. So I've taken my own steps to address that. But that's something that for them, I want to make sure that they are able to disconnect. I try to, something I launched a couple months ago is every month we get together as a team. So Harbor House will pay for dinner at some restaurant, but just say, hey, whoever wants to come after work, we'll pay for the meal. Just come and hang out.
Just be together.
Just talk.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
That's
Because
so good.
with the pandemic, we were also isolated and separated, that it's also easier to dehumanize people when you don't look them in the eyes, when you aren't building those relationships.
That's so important.
So trying to find opportunities to gather. And in July, we're actually having our first staff and families gathering in years. So we're going to have 50 people all together. Your families, have your families meet each other, because we're not just these robots coming into the office and going home. There's so much more to who we are.
Such a rich perspective to kind of go, you're a mom, you're a dad, you're a sister, brother, whatever their role is in life outside of the work that they do is so important for, I think, each other to see that.
Yeah. I think those are all definitely different strategies, and genuinely caring for your team. That's something that at the end of the day, I hope all of my team members know. And I display that a lot with the leadership team so that they can ripple that down. But knowing that if there is something going on personally that you need to talk through, I'm here. I'll draw a line and a boundary that I'm not your counselor, but I can be here to talk about how it might be impacting your work, or especially when it comes to personal finances. We just had a financial advisor at our staff meeting. I said, I want you to talk more about retirement and show some time value of money charts and all these things. And then afterwards I said, if anybody wants to talk about this more in an informal setting with me, let me know.
I'm all over that.
That will be, I will buy you coffee.
You love that,
let me talk about this.
Could I?
But I think just make sure that your team knows that you're there and accessible. So my team knows that although I might be very busy during the day, if you text me, email me, call me and say, hey, I need to meet, I will put you on my calendar and I will get with you. It might not be in that immediate moment, but you will be a priority and you'll get my undivided attention, because I don't want to try to fit you in 5 minutes between meetings. I want to be able to have a conversation and look at your eyes. They're going to drop a big bomb on you and you're like, okay, we got 3 minutes to talk about this.
Exactly.
No, but making sure I can carve out that time and space with them.
So you said you offer that to your team, but what do you do for you? What do you do to make sure? Because I'm always like looking like, oh, I wouldn't ask. Like I'd be doing 10,000 things, and then I'd be like, well, then somebody asked, well, would you ask one of your employees to do that? I was like, no, that's crazy. Why would I do that? And they're like, oh, I see what you did there.
Like, can't take your own medicine, can you?
Exactly. So what do you do to kind of be able to give you some self-care?
I will say in the past 2 years, that has been incredibly difficult with the pandemic. Just because with shifting remote, I moved the majority of staff remote, but then me and 2 other employees stayed in the shelter. The other 2 would kind of rotate out who that was, but I stayed I did not work remote I think in the past 2.5 years, it was 2 days I worked remote.
Okay.
But otherwise, I was in the office. I was answering the hotlines
Kinda
and everything
anchoring
like
the
that.
thing. Yeah.
Yes, and then just through the growth that we've experienced, I couldn't tell you the last time I worked only a 40-hour work week. I was sick for a couple weeks back. First time I was sick in years. Used 40 hours, still had 150, 60 hours of PTO still. So I won't say I'm good at taking my own medicine, but that is something that I do have to think through and make my list of what are the things that I enjoy. And sometimes when I do just want to come home, veg out, and turn on Netflix, which there is nothing wrong with that. That's definitely okay. But when you notice a trend of, okay, I need to do something else that's on this list, that does bring me joy.
Right.
Because doing that, even though it might not feel joyful in the moment because I'm doing it begrudgingly, I know the outcome will be good.
Right.
I know that it will be energizing. So for me, I love nature. I love being outside. I love traveling. So for the nature side, it might be getting outside and going for a walk, something as simple as that, or even just going out on my back patio and unwinding, looking at the grass, or even mowing yard work. I do love that.
I call it tractor therapy when I lived out in the country.
I was raised in the country, so manual labor is my love language.
You had me until the mowing. I love the gardening, but not the mowing.
So I got to throw out a fun Jenny memory.
Oh, okay.
So
interesting.
you being loving outdoors. So a few months ago, I was interested in Jenny and I doing a tag team on a community event that we were talking about, the helping nonprofits and those kind of things. And I was texting her probably, I don't know, month or 2 months ahead of that. And like, hey, here's the date, and this is what we'd be doing. Well, how do you think? Her answer back was classic. She goes, can I get back to you? I'm sitting in a tree stand in Michigan right now. And I'm like, yes, you can.
Don't quite have my calendar with me. Barely reception.
And I'm like, there's some self-care. You're out in the woods in a tree stand, just watching the world go by. And I was like, I got to find a way to work that in.
I love
so
that.
that's my fun Jenny story. Where you had boundaries, but I will add this. I'll throw out a free coaching session on that unused PTO you were talking about. We'll do that another time. But
okay.
I'll throw that out there. Buy coffee, no charge, coaching session. We'll talk about that another time. Yeah.
That's something that I do have. I'm finally getting some people in the right positions that I haven't had the capacity to do that. But like I hired a new operations manager who's taking a portion of my job. I hired a new community outreach director. So like my position is being split into 3 positions.
Okay, those are good steps.
So like there is light at the end of the tunnel. Because like for me, a goal has always been to go to a different country every year, at least one other country. Obviously, pandemic kind of threw a wrench in that.
Put the brakes on that.
Yeah, but that's something that I'm like, once all of this gets settled a little bit and get all of these grants started, even with scheduling this, you reached out and I was like, I can't right now. I can't even think about that right now, but let me get past a couple of these grant deadlines and we're at the end of the fiscal year now. But there are some of those things that taking that time off, and my team knows that there's 2 ways that Jenny takes time off. Either I'm taking the time off and you can still contact me, or I'm taking the time off and you can only contact me if the building is on fire, if somebody has to go to the hospital due to some kind of violence, or like I can't remember the third one, but they know that threshold of, otherwise you have to call the program director and she will make that determining factor. But I'm looking at that into my calendar of planning out some of that time off, since I can finally breathe a little bit more, since the people are getting in the right seats.
I'm chuckling because I remember a parent who's a friend of mine having that rule with their kids certain times of the day. So, pandemic, we had saying they'd answer the phone, the house better be on fire and somebody's arm better be broken. Or you should not be calling me today.
Yeah.
You're not that way. But I get the message though.
And that comes down to empowering your team. So for example, this past weekend, our security camera TV went out. And so usually I would have gotten a call very quickly of we don't know what to do. But then I found out like a day after that had happened of, we called the company. We went ahead and asked them to go ahead and buy the TV, blah, blah, blah. And so then I found out later, I was like, amazing.
That's
you
great.
did everything
Problem
perfect.
solved,
Like
and
I didn't
know.
need to be involved in this. So making sure too that if your team is having to call you and ask you for questions of, can I use this pen? Like, like because you can easily tell what level of leadership you're at based on the questions you are being asked.
Yeah. Did you find that difficult in being able to kind of like peel your some of your jobs to these people, because I know with me it was like
letting
Jeff,
go is so hard to do.
coaching with Jeff, he was like, the business was like this, so I had to kind of like unravel myself from all of these things, and it was really difficult for me, and it still is.
He's growing though.
Yeah, so he's been helping me, but it was tough to figure out like, oh, okay, I really like to, it was kind of like what things I really like to do, but also what things I just don't need to do anymore, and that was very eye-opening. So,
yes, 100% it is. So that kind of touches into the concept of perfectionism too.
Yes, it does.
So that has been, I've been kind of exploring all of that in the past 3 to 4 months, because when I started in August of 2018, I joined an amazing team that had experienced its own trauma and that had kind of run into a couple of walls. And so I kind of went into crisis intervention mode with that team. And so I built it up in the community, like Harbor House now where it is versus Harbor House 4 years ago. Probably just for you two from a community perspective, even looks different.
Oh, yeah.
And so I take a lot of pride in that, because that's something that I worked really hard to get it to that point. So now with building up this whole community outreach team, I've got a director, a prevention specialist. I'm hiring a second one. So hopefully I can get that filled soon. But that's been having to let go of a lot of things that I built from the ground up.
Right.
And so that is very hard, and that has been a learning process for me. But at the same time, I know that I only have so many hours in a day.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I need to make sure that I'm using that time well, and understanding too of if I'm coaching well, if I'm training well, if I'm providing proper feedback and investing in the team, then what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
Like, they're not going to go out and say that, like, spread lies about domestic violence. Like, they're not going to hurt us because I'm hiring the right people that I trust, that are kind. And that's something that goes so deep into our team of making sure that no matter who we're talking to, whether it's a survivor of domestic violence, a community member, a contractor, how you make them feel is going to be what their takeaway is of our organization.
Right.
And every person knows somebody who needs us. And what you're leaving with them is going to decide whether or not they're going to tell them about us. So if I can hire people that understand that to the core, that are kind and compassionate and get to the event early to help set up for the tables that they're going to be speaking at that event, do it. So I've had to just make sure that I'm setting that groundwork so that I can step back. And with the operations manager, it's the same thing of making sure that you hire the right person who can get the job done, but staying communicative and holding individuals accountable for that. So it's not just I hired them and I passed off the job description and I stepped away. So it's a transition process for me. But it is very startling to see, like, oh, all of these things that I've done for 4 years, or my job's being split into all these different ones. But it needs to happen because it's going to hold us back as an organization if I don't shift some of this off, because I need to have my time freed up to do some other things that do only fall on me. When it comes to a presentation in the community, other people can do that. Not other people can sign off on a grant contract and execute and make hiring decisions. So it just comes down to an assessment of what can I do versus what can others do. And delegation. Trusting your team.
That's good. That's one of the things that we talked about at times, was identify the things that only you can do in your role as a creative director. For Pathfinders, there are certain things that only Brian needs to do. There are things Brian's great at that he can do, that there's also other people that can do that, and it's figuring out which one is which that can be really tricky, especially early on.
And I'll say in those, the first 2 years, when it was more in like crisis intervention, crisis management mode, I was in the crawl space fixing things. I was changing toilet seats. I was doing all of that. But then, part of it was we didn't have the full support team. We didn't have the finances. And at the end of the day, things do come down to resources. But now, I'm like, well, I haven't had to be in the crawl space in a long time. Like
maybe that's a good thing.
I know, that was a big joke with our board for a long time. I was like, oh, is Jenny in the crawl space this month fixing things?
It's supposed to be a measure. If you
Answer is no.
Answer is no.
But it does come down to being able to know that. And my supervisors and I, we talk about that a lot. They are such caring and compassionate people, and will, I'll go outside and I'll pull the weeds with you in the garden. that's great. And I love that you have the heart to do that. However, other people can do that, but they can't be coaching their staff to address some paperwork concerns or doing a mentoring session with the counselors or something like that. So it's sometimes hard because we want to do everything, but you can't.
No. You have to be able to just step back and look, I can't do all this. And be okay with that too.
You don't have to.
No, and you don't have to.
Yeah, when you have a team, like as I hear you describe them, that has heart, it has compassion for the work that they're doing, that cares about it more than just, this is my job and I just work here for the paycheck. Yeah, we all like to get paid, but it's more than that.
Yeah.
And in a sensitive, high-need area like you, those you serve, that's so important that those are people with heart, and that's good, like the heart of leadership and modeling for them what that looks like. And I think that helps retain staff, and it helps when you're hiring people. That like here's how we do things here. You know, when you're telling stories about culture. And that's so important, because then they come in knowing that expectation is we do have boundaries. We serve these people in this space, but here's how we do it.
Yeah, very much so. And you know, something you touched on in saying that is they don't just come for the paycheck.
Right.
Nobody finds themselves in social work for the paycheck. But that is a big part of you know, even coming down to self-care. And for me, why I needed to shift some of this off of me is one of my biggest driving forces for the team is they're so amazing, but they weren't compensated as if they were so amazing. And a lot of the team too said for a long time we would do this work for free. And I told them, I said, if I hear that one more time, I'm writing you up.
Do not say that.
Yes, because that's not true. You need to be able to live. You need to be able to care. And I said, I understand where you're coming from, and the heart of you just are so passionate about this work. However, the skills that you bring, the expertise that you bring, the compassion that you bring, there's a dollar amount to that. And so I was looking at it yesterday, just kind of in preparation of this, of the more time that I've been able to free up off myself, the more I've been able to grow our budget and our grants. And in my 4 years there, from fiscal year 19 to looking at fiscal year 23, so what's about to start in a couple of weeks, the average staff wage increase has been by 65%. The highest was by 92%. And so that's something that for me, and they know this about me, is that I will work hard to get you more money, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it does come down to retention. No, people aren't coming here for the money, they're coming here for the mission and for the work, but our team is so amazing and deserves the world that it reached this point of frustration of I had full-time employees that had to work part-time jobs to make ends meet. That is unfair to them, and that I think is abuse because they're getting this very traumatic day life and then having to go waitress at tables and everything like
just
that.
To cover their costs.
So that's been a big priority for me. That comes down to retention, comes down to leadership and staff priorities, and me being able to know what I need to do with my time, because nobody else on my team can do that.
Right.
So if I can get some of this other stuff off, it allows me to continue to focus on that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Maybe one other question or two that I was interested in hearing from you is, I know you talked about your parents and how they modeled a lot for you as a leader, but who are some other leaders that other leaders or leadership characteristics that you've said, I want to be intentional about doing it, or I want to emulate that? It's maybe early on in your career, especially, you watch people around you to say, that's how I want to do that when I'm in that role eventually.
Yeah. I think with leadership, it's a lot of observing what you see around you and what you do and don't like. I've had, my own leaders and supervisors in the past that some were great, some not so much. But you can learn something from all of them. Of I'm not going to do it that way, and I am going to do it this way. So some have just been past bosses that I had. Even in high school, I worked 3 jobs throughout high school to pay for college, and with each of those bosses, I was able to learn something from them. So one entity that I watched throughout my childhood was my best friend's parents. They were like serial entrepreneurs, is what I'll call them. That they were starting businesses and leading their team and working. One was in government, one was more in education, and they had other businesses that they were running as well. And I I loved just observing their approach to people, because they were the kindest people that would give you the shirt off their back and do whatever you needed and always showed up, even though they had all of these other entities that they were doing. And in one of their, actually 2 of their ventures, I had worked for them, so I got to experience them on that boss side. So I loved getting to be exposed to that. That was probably starting in like junior high, all throughout high school. And even now, there's still such great supports to me that they had handmade mugs that had Harbor House and then each staff member's name. They did that for all of my team. And I'm like, and you guys live hours away. I see you once every 3 years.
Yeah.
And so they just like are
You're still investing in my life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
But I think getting to observe that, because it was very different than my parents. Which they were, more focused on with my mom, every person who had a need coming into our home.
Right.
So then through that, I learned a lot through observing their different approach to leadership. Of that leadership is helping other people, because the world is community and we are meant to be supportive of one another, especially if you do have more privilege or more resources. So those are 2 key units, thinking of a little bit in the past. Thinking of more recently, Vicki Smith, she's the CEO of the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and was one of the very first people I met after I had accepted the job, but before I started. And she's been an amazing mentor, and just for me to even observe her leadership style she's been in the movement for 40, 50 years, has found national nonprofits, worked on VAWA back in the 90s with now President Biden, like just all of these other entities. And she has come alongside me and put me in a lot of the spaces that have allowed me to grow. And even, not even 6 months to a year ago, had a conversation with me of, Jenny, here's some things that you do really well, but here's some 3 different areas that I think would, I think you need to continue focusing on these. And I'm like, you see me like 3 times a year.
But you nailed it.
But
you're right.
She was right, 100%. I've been focusing on those areas. But like for her, it's been amazing to watch her leadership, that she can work on national level legislation and Congress, and then state level, and then even small little executive directors like me running nonprofits that don't pale in comparison to that national level. But those have been some leaders that I've observed. Obviously, there's a ton of people that have impacted me too. Like, there's the Houston Thompsons, the Yvonne Chalfants of the world that coming alongside them, watching, asking questions.
Absolutely.
And those people obviously propelled me forward, and just observing their leadership styles.
Well, in doing this, the common through line is great leaders have other great leaders that are either looking at them or following them or somehow. So that's just a part of it. And the observing and the listening, I think, is just also a part of it as well. Yeah.
Nobody gets where they are by themselves, for good or for bad.
That's right.
But especially like when you do achieve some kind of great success, you look around you and you see everybody that's helped you get there. My own support system, my biological and chosen family, that are the people that I can call up on those really hard days, and they check me. They are that encouragement. They are whatever I need in that moment. There are the mentors that I can call up of, I don't know how to handle this situation. Please just help me get through this. And even the people that I'll never have a conversation with, but I can learn from them. And that's even true like on the media side of things. You can watch that and you can learn something from all of that. I don't want to turn into that kind of leader, or I really like how they handled this situation. So let me add that to my tool belt.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, is there any book or podcast or, I don't know, something that just keeps your leadership, knowledge going? Is there something that you could kind of share with us and everyone else?
I used to, I still like reading, but I've noticed that in this season of past year, 6 months or so of just like not being able to do as much of the self-care, but getting more to that. Reading is something that I can't do until I'm relaxed. And so like if I can get a week off, then by day 3, I'll start reading a book and I'll finish it within 2 days. So like when I was hunting, I had taken about a week off and I finished 3 books. So like I don't do as much reading regularly as I used to, just because my brain is done by the end of the day.
So bandwidth.
No, I don't.
Be in the right place and the right spirit of things. Yeah.
Some books that have helped me that I continue to reflect on but haven't read as much recently. You know, I mentioned Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers. There's a lot of strength in that, especially in working with your teams through that.
Okay.
Another one, Sheryl Sandberg. She's a favorite author, Adam Grant as well. But Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In from 10 years ago or so.
Yeah.
But especially for women, I think that book is helpful. And I think we've come a long way in the feminist movement and women in leadership too, of having more workplaces that we've been able to change the cultures to be more adaptive to women growing in that workplace setting. And then another one that's really good for teams, it's by, I believe, Charles Feltman, called The Thin Book of Trust. I walked through that with my team, and it's about building trust in the workplace. So that was the last team book we went through, and it is thin, maybe 100 pages.
It has to be with a name like that.
Yeah, I know. Because also, I'm like, if I'm going to ask my team, like, oh yeah, read 30 pages. From a college standpoint, that's super easy. But then, like, for these busy working professionals, it needs to be 5. You know,
Keep it short.
because their brain is also getting very tired. But that one I really enjoyed as getting to walk through that with my team. But those have probably been some of the ones that have kind of stayed with me. Creativity Inc. is another one. I can't
that's
remember.
one of my favorites.
Ed Catmull,
That's on Brian's shelf.
Ed Catmull.
Yeah,
That's on my
okay.
shelf, and I'm having the team kind of pass it along because it's so good. It's so good about creativity. It's so good about teams. Everything about it. I just love.
Yeah.
I've recommended to Jeff.
Yeah,
a dozen times.
I need to pull it off your shelf
I haven't
and
read
take
it in a
home with
while,
me.
but
Yeah.
it's really, and that makes sense that, especially from you with the Pixar, the creative side of things. But that helped me too to learn about my own creativity because I've never identified with that word of creative.
Well, and it's such a large umbrella too. Like it can fit, it kind of fit anything underneath that. And what I like to tell everyone that I talk to, like everybody's creative. Like it just
Looks
it's
different.
how you fit that into it. Like a gardener is creative. They're so I mean there's just so much.
Yeah. Good. Anything else?
I think that's all I got.
Okay.
Jenny, thank you so much. This has
thank
been
you
such
for having
a
me.
pleasure to get to know you more and speak with you about all the good things you're doing for our community.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And it was an honor to be able to talk a little bit about leadership with you and hope that there was some nugget from here that helps somebody else.
There's a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Next week, we'll be joined by the president of Kankakee Community College, Dr. Michael Boyd.